looked to the right to make sure I got everybody. I tried to get everyone with a handout or a pitch, but, and about 10 or 15 said they just have a rule they won't do it until they talk to their staff.
Okay.
So they'll sign on today, and some others with lines too long. We should have everybody. And I think, are you helping Matt with the dear colleague?
I think Marilyn was.
Might mention to her just to tell him to get it out. Today's the last day, and that if something happens, if he's fired in the next 2 weeks, which we think is a possibility, indeed a possibility. But if he's fired in the next 2 weeks, or whenever he's fired, if they're not on it,
What does that say?
it's going to make them look bad.
And this
So
is
I'm
kind of
so-
last opportunity.
And it's for everybody, not just Democrats, but Republicans too.
That's okay.
Yeah. We'll go and give them a buzz. Enjoy your day off.
Yeah.
You missed a big day.
Well, I was glad that I'd written that
Yes, that was
discharge
smart.
petition on Monday, because it was, Matt changed a couple words around. He didn't put one specific vote, what a majority vote is for some reason in that lead paragraph, or the second paragraph, but everything else was pretty much what I wrote on Monday.
I changed the thing at the end, instead of saying call on Speaker Ryan, just say call on House Republicans to do it. You want Republicans to be held responsible for not doing it, not just Ryan. But it was a good day. I mean, I went in the morning. It was a reception for Cecile Richards, and hardly anybody there, surprisingly. And so Nancy came in, and I said, "Am I released now?" That Engelbert Humperdinck and I want to know. And Chuck Schumer was standing there, and she said something to Chuck, and she said, "Chuck, what Steve wants to do this discharge petition. What do you think?" And he said, "Well, I think he should find out what the leader wants." And she said, "Well, he wanted it." He was kind of tense, like he was kind of didn't quite put a deuce in a box, which is fine with me. And she said, "Well, he wanted to put it in Monday, but he held it off at my request so we could work on the omnibus." And I said, "It's not in the omnibus, is it?" She said, "No, it's not." I said, "So Engelbert and I are released." And she didn't say anything, and I just, great. Walked off and went straight to the cloak room. Got the Matt to call the clerk to come in to do the signatures and get it started. And when I went in there, it just happened to be the time
I think that's only
on
for
the floor.
stills.
I didn't realize. I went in there, I guess it was noon. And I said, 1 minute now. There's nobody in there doing 1 minute. This one, so I got up to the 1 minute. That was just coincidence.
Good stuff.
Right place at the right time. And then we tweeted real good, and we had most of our. Hey, Louise. You and me.
No, there's got to be more of us.
Oh, Jerry will be here for sure. He'll be here. Thank you. It's
Oh,
Chewy.
sorry, I messed it up.
Well, I
My bad.
didn't do it very well.
My bad.
I'll get it. Thank you.
I didn't do it good.
Is Chewy your guy?
Yes.
Good.
He only got 68 though.
Only 68, I know, but that's still great.
I was hoping like closer to 75.
Is that what you normally get, 75?
Yeah,
Well, he's not you.
we could have done it.
The 68th one is.
He's real smart.
Yeah.
He decided to spend money on taking with him the county commissioner, 2 state reps, and a judge.
Good.
So his whole team. Of course, that costs. You have to invest in that. So he did.
Are you going to get mayor a shot?
No.
See?
Yeah.
How about governor of Puerto Rico?
No.
No. You going to move to Puerto Rico?
About,
You got a house there already.
I got one there. We're gonna spend lots of time. Lots of time.
It was good yesterday. We had 105 people to sign on. Hopefully everybody will sign
Oh,
on.
I gotta get. If you see me on the floor, let me know. I ain't signing.
Well, you just go to the desk. You know,
So you gotta.
remind you.
What's your job?
I'm reminded you. I know.
What's your job on the house? Oh, you gotta grab me on the house. I'm gonna go right there with you. Lou, and I go. Oh yeah, no problem. Right.
I'll get you.
There are a lot of people with you. Just you gotta like.
Well, that's why
It's
they
like
got
the cattle that you got.
herd. Well, I stayed at the door where you come in on the side and got people, and they came in. I was watching the side door where you and Raul usually come in, and I catch people over there, run over there and get them, and they come back.
You know where we go. Hey,
Yeah, I'll come in that side door. But I got
you can sell these. Take a pic. You can sell. We're what is this? Modeling for these. And then,
Butch and Sundance. We're Butch and Sundance.
I can never remember which one was which.
the glasses aren't helping to distinguish us.
Well, you know, what time is it?
No, until
What time is it? Not quite.
It's almost 9:30.
We'll give them until 9:30, and then I do my Alexander Haig.
Yeah. Okay.
Give you these. You get them. I got over Ireland. 9:30, I'm going down. Got 1 minute. I'm gonna wait till 9:30. Well, I think it says say 9:30. It's 9:29. Give them all the way to 9:30.
You're terrible.
Hello, I'm Alexander Haig, and I'm in charge. The war will begin shortly.
Somebody here still gets the reference. Don't know Alexander Haig.
Yeah, that's fine. What's your problem, Marty? I remember when you, when Peg was nice.
Felt compelled to tell him that most of the people in the room would know.
I just said, somebody gets that reference. You know, his brother was a professor at my Jesuit priest. I had a conversation about that one. How the family is.
Hi, good to see you, good to see you.
Hard to hug away properly. You guys.
No, it's not so easy. I don't want to stand quiet.
Partly about process.
So basically, we probably start with water and then we
Sir, no cameras on the stage, please?
I'll get down. That's right, there you go.
Freedom of the press. I think he's working for 60.
Did the other day.
Okay, is Sheila here? Yes, okay. Are we ready?
down in front, please.
Good morning.
As we have all seen, President Trump has spent the last few days launching an all-out assault on Special Counsel Mueller and his investigation, saying things like the Mueller probe should never have been started, that it is a total witch hunt, and that Mueller's team is stacked with Democrats. Let us set aside for a moment that so much of what the President says is simply factually incorrect. These tantrums are more than merely the online musings of a passionate viewer of Fox News. These statements are threats from the President of the United States against our rule of law. They specifically target Special Counsel Robert Mueller, who is charged with investigating allegations of serious crimes against the United States, including a conspiracy to defraud the United States government in an attempt to influence the 2016 election. That is why I am standing here today with my Democratic colleagues from the House Judiciary Committee to deliver a united message to President Trump. Do not meddle with the Special Counsel investigation. We expect, and the rule of law demands, that the Special Counsel be permitted to complete his investigation wherever it may lead, free from political interference, and that the facts be presented for public review so that the American people can know the full truth. Let me be clear. This warning is about more than a threat to fire Robert Mueller. We must also be concerned that the President may fire Attorney General Sessions and replace him with a lackey who will constrain the Special Counsel in all sorts of ways from the inside that the public may never see. Remember that the Special Counsel operates under the supervision of the Attorney General. Since Mr. Sessions is recused, that responsibility today falls to the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, who, by all accounts, has supervised the Mueller investigation in a fair and even-handed manner and has given Mr. Mueller all the resources and discretion he needs to do his job effectively. But if Sessions were to be fired and a new Attorney General, who is not recused, appointed, the new Attorney General, who would be totally beholden to President Trump, would take control of the investigation. The new Attorney General could throttle the investigation by shrinking Mueller's resources or by shutting down entire lines of inquiry, and the public might be entirely in the dark. In many ways, this behind-the-scenes dismantling of the investigation could be even more dangerous than directly firing Mueller. Whatever one may think of the Attorney General, and my colleagues and I could certainly give you an earful, the American people must understand what is at stake if the President were to fire Sessions or if he pushed him to resign. It could signal the end of an independent investigation, and we cannot let that happen. In the face of the President's constant attacks on the leadership of the Department of Justice, some of my colleagues in the majority have had the courage to stand up and tell President Trump that he is wrong. I commend Republicans like Senators McCain, Senator Flake, and Senator Graham, who have found the conviction to defend our traditions and the institutions that make our country great. And I know plenty of House Republican members who share these concerns, who are committed to the rule of law, and who are worried by the President's actions. I urge them to follow the example of Senators McCain, Graham, and Flake, and to speak out. Where, however, is the Republican leadership? Why does Speaker Ryan take days to make tepid statements in general support of the Mueller investigation? Why does the majority refuse to take action to protect the Special Counsel from a President who clearly wants him gone? Why would they not agree to a bipartisan amendment to the omnibus budget bill to make it all but impossible to remove a Special Counsel without cause? My colleagues here have the courage to do what Republican leadership will not. Mr. President, we are watching you. The American people are watching you. If you shut down or throttle the Mueller investigation by firing either Sessions or Rosenstein or Mueller, you will plunge this country into a constitutional crisis. I am proud to be joined by my Democratic colleagues on the Judiciary Committee, and I would like to turn to them now for a few words. First, Sheila Jackson-Lee.
I'm proud to stand here with my Democratic colleagues and particularly our ranking member, Mr. Nadler, for his leadership and vision on the sacredness of the Constitution and as well the role that the Judiciary Committee, both House and Senate, play in coddling and nurturing on behalf of the American people the infrastructure of justice, and that is the Constitution, and to thwart any interests or any act that would create a constitutional crisis. I think this press conference today with my colleagues is to explain to the American people what those words are and why should they be concerned and why are we standing before them just moments before there is a work recess that members will be scattered throughout their districts working on important issues with their constituents. What could happen? And I asked them to recollect, if they could, even though this is more dire, the constitutional crisis, the midnight massacre of the Richard Nixon administration. I think it is important to note that this should not be partisan. It should, in fact, be nonpartisan. The idea of the infrastructure of government collapsing is what a constitutional crisis means. It is similar to you having a house with a plumbing system and an electric system, and those systems go out. You would argue that your house may not serve the purpose that it is to serve. In this instance, the President of the United States has, from the very beginning, attempted to delegitimize the special counsel, which is a reason to be concerned because it is part of the infrastructure of government. He has called the investigations a witch hunt. He has now moved to the level of calling the name of Special Counsel Mueller and his associates, lawyers, and others, including, it seems, Mr. Dowd, has asked for Mr. Mueller to be gone. Of course, those have been corrected, but the President has never corrected his comments about this particular investigation. So an attack on the infrastructure of government can lead us to a constitutional crisis, which leads me to believe that I am saddened by the fact that the leadership would not allow a neutral statement of protection of the special counsel to be in the omnibus. I think that is a direct attack on the infrastructure of government for the American people to be comforted by the fact, since most of them believe that the order of government is to see the process begin, continue, and finish in an orderly fashion. So I know my colleague will be speaking of initiatives. I have an initiative that would protect the special counsel, and I hope that some initiative, combined initiatives, would be passed immediately to protect the special counsel, giving us an infrastructure for that special counsel to be terminated only with the intervention of a court. Let me just quickly say, the President first fired Attorney General Sally Yates, then FBI Director Comey. There was an active investigation opened into the connections between Trump and associates in the Kremlin. All of this under the special counsel. Trump has continuously talked about firing General Sessions, which would create the toppling, the waterfall of the constitutional crisis. But the special counsel has been effective. The special counsel has since indicted 3 companies and 19 individuals, including the president's former national security advisor, his former deputy campaign chairman, and secured guilty pleas from 5 individuals, including 3 senior members of the Trump campaign. Trump continues to decry the special counsel investigation as a hoax and a witch hunt. Our Republican colleagues are certain that the president will not terminate or otherwise compromise the special counsel's investigation, so commented by the majority leader and the Speaker of the House in the last 24 hours. Given Trump's minute-by-minute changes on significant matters, I'd rather take the president's word for it. I'd rather not take the president's word for it. In his firings of Yates and Comey and his pressure of Sessions and Rosenstein, the president has indicated that the idea of firing Robin Mueller is not foreign to him, and something that he may do as he believes he should do. And so, as I stand here with my colleagues today, we're hoping to put down a wall, a line. I'd like to call it the red, white, and blue line on behalf of the American people, that we will not stand for a constitutional crisis and interfere with the legitimate and sanctioned work of the special counsel, Mr. Mueller, who, as we always remind you, is a Republican. I ask where are the voices of the leadership, and I ask that legislation to protect Mr. Mueller is needed, is demanded, and I hope that we will have something within a short period of time. My final point, if this happens, the Congress needs to be called back to stop the dismantling of the Constitution if the President, over the next couple of days, chooses to fire Special Counsel Mueller.
Thank you. Representative Steve Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Nadler, and all the members of the committee, and I incorporate by reference everything they've said. Representative Jackson and I each filed bills to protect Mr. Mueller, and one was prospective and one was a post-review if he's fired. The bill which I filed, 4669, is bipartisan with Walter Jones. It's bipartisan in the Senate with Senator Coons and Senator Tillis. We filed a discharge petition yesterday and had over 100 members sign it. We're calling on everybody to join us today and the last day to sign it. Our dear colleague went to Democrats and Republicans both. What the bill does is provides a due process rights to the special counsel if the special counsel is fired for other than cause, and cause is spelled out in the bill, including incapacity, violation of Department of Justice regulations and rules, or illegalities in the course of the investigation. The president has said he's done nothing wrong, but as I look at my friend Trey Gowdy, who said he's not acting like he's innocent. If you're innocent, you shouldn't fear the results of an investigation. And he says there's nothing there, and as Representative Lee has shown or said, there have been about a half dozen indictments, nearly a half dozen guilty pleas. Mr. General Flynn and Mr. Papadopoulos and Mr. Gates, they know there's something there. They wouldn't have pled guilty otherwise, and there are a couple other people who pled guilty. And in the indictments, you've got 23 or 24, whatever the grand jury number is here, of Americans who've found probable cause that something's happened. So the investigation needs to go on. Mr. Mueller is an outstanding American who's served us in Vietnam and served us with Republican and Democratic presidents appointing him at the FBI, and he did a great job there, and he's doing a great job here. And I just call on all my colleagues to join in, and I thank the ones behind me who have signed on already, and the ones that haven't, I urge them to do so. And I've talked to Republicans one-on-one and asked them to join too. I hope that all members will, because this is a red, white, and blue issue, not a blue issue. Thank you, Mr. Nadler, and thank you, members.
Thank you. Representative Hank Johnson.
Thank you, Ranking Member Nadler. I'm proud to join my colleagues here today at this podium. Our country was founded upon hallowed principles of liberty and justice. Liberty and justice are like twins. You can't have one without the other. A threat to justice is a threat to our liberty. An attack on justice is an attack on our freedom. The events of last weekend were an attack on justice. After being subjected to great public pressure from President Trump, and despite having recused himself from the Trump investigation, Attorney General Jeff Sessions succumbed to the pressure and in a late Friday night whacking, they fired FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. They followed up with increasingly frantic tweets by President Trump attacking Special Counsel Mueller and his investigation. It's becoming increasingly apparent, ladies and gentlemen, that President Trump is desperate and is getting close to taking action that would plunge this nation into a constitutional crisis. The president appears to be ready to follow through on his red line threat, which was to move against the investigation if the investigation turned towards his personal finances. It's no coincidence that last week that line was crossed with last week's disclosure that Special Counsel Mueller had subpoenaed Trump Organization records. If the president follows through on what many fear, and that is firing Attorney General Sessions and replacing him with someone who would be willing to follow orders and fire Bob Mueller or somehow restrict the scope of his ongoing investigation, such action would most certainly be a clear and unambiguous move to obstruct justice. Senator Graham said it best when he said that America is a rule of law country. If and when the president fires Attorney General Sessions, it will be clear that justice and the rule of law will be under attack. It will then be time, ladies and gentlemen, for all good men and women of this country, including my friends and fellow patriots on the other side of the aisle, to stand with House Judiciary Committee Democrats to protect liberty and justice. Any attempts by the Trump administration to fire Mueller or impede his investigation is our red line, and we will not let him cross it without an appropriate response. So Congress must act to protect the special counsel by passing H.R. 4669, the Special Counsel Integrity Act. My colleague Sheila Jackson Lee has legislation that would do the same thing and protect the special counsel. Congress must take action to do this before a constitutional crisis occurs. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. We've now been joined by Congressman Ted Deutsch.
Right on cue, thanks. Good morning. Trey Gowdy said this week, give Bob Mueller the time, the independence, and the resources to do his job. A job that he was thrust into by Trump-appointed Department of Justice officials. Senator Graham said that Mueller is following the evidence where it takes him, and I think it's very important he be allowed to do his job without interference. Both Senator Graham and Senator Flake have said that other Republicans share their desire to protect the investigation. Speaker Ryan's spokesperson said, as the Speaker has always said, Mr. Mueller and his team should be able to do their job. Well, there is nothing left for Republicans in Congress to say. The fate of our nation rests in what Republicans in Congress do. This is not a drill. This is a test of our institutions and the people who serve in them. This is a test of Speaker Ryan and Senator McConnell. Will they stand up for what is good and right? Will they stand up for the truth? We're about to go on a 2-week recess, and there is a lot of speculation that during this time, Trump will initiate another Saturday night massacre. President Trump has been vested with tremendous power through an election that was compromised by Russian interference. The intelligence community knew it before the election, and Mueller has confirmed it, already securing almost 20 indictments of Russian nationals and Trump campaign officials. We cannot allow Trump to fire Mueller. It will throw our country into crisis. We have the opportunity to stop this crisis before it starts. Americans deserve the rule of law. Americans deserve due process. Americans deserve law and order, real law and order. There is nowhere left for our Republican colleagues to hide. There are no more excuses to be made. It's time to pass legislation that will protect Mueller from President Trump's abuse of power. And if we don't protect Mueller's investigation from Trump's obstruction of justice, and if the president violates the Constitution and causes a constitutional crisis, the only choice will be then to unite in our efforts to impeach him. We cannot sit by while the President of the United States corrupts the power of his office in order to hide the truth. And I'm honored to be here with my colleagues today to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Luis Gutierrez.
Well, nobody's been a bigger critic of Jeff Sessions than I've been. Nobody. When he was nominated AG, I put out a statement that said, quote, if you have nostalgia for the day when blacks kept quiet, gays were in the closet, immigrants were invisible, and women stayed in the kitchen, well, Senator Jefferson Sessions is your man. He killed DACA, infected this administration, and his evil spawn, Stephen Miller, has burrowed into the White House, deep into Donald Trump's brain, and will continue the mass deportation agenda and other measures to carry out the orders of white nationalist fringe, with or without Jeff Sessions. With that being said, with all of the damage that Sessions has done and may still do to voting rights, to immigrants, to Latinos, to African Americans, women, Muslims, and everyone else, if Trump fires Sessions in order to rein in the Russia investigation, it will leave no choice but for this committee to go forward with impeachment hearings. And I think, based on some conversations I've had and some statements I've seen in the press, it will leave a lot of Republicans with no choice but to go forward with us. Easter Sunday, Good Friday, the whole Semana Santa. These are very sacred days for me and my family and just about everyone in Puerto Rico. And you throw in Passover, and this is an important family time for all of us. And on this Friday, the mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, is joining me to go to San Juan with the delegation tomorrow. And we're going to be there to continue the efforts to restoring life, food, decency, medicine to the people of Puerto Rico. And this trip is very special because it gives us a chance to meet and interact, and in my opinion, to thank the unsung heroes of response and recovery efforts. When Trump and Washington turned its back on Puerto Rico, others had to step in, and I look forward to continuing that relief effort tomorrow as we take pallets of food and medicine and clothing and generators to the people of Puerto Rico. But let's be clear. I want to say this to the leader, Ranking Member Nadler. I'll sleep with my cell phone right next to my ear. And if word comes down that Donald Trump is taking out Sessions, talking about Mueller, talking other actions to undermine the rule of law and obstruct justice, Jerry Nadler, I'm going to be on the first plane back here to join you. And I know the fine, distinguished members of this Judiciary Committee. This is a rare moment when a small group of people, those that are here before you, I hope at least some of our Republican colleagues are standing up to defend the American people, the Constitution, against the President of the United States. And we intend to take that role very seriously. And we will drop everything, even the most sacred occasions in our lives, the most solemn occasions of the year. We will drop them in order to defend the people of the United States of America and the Constitution of the United States of America. Quiero decir que el congresista Gerald Nadler, como portavoz de los demócratas en el Comité de lo Jurídico, nos ha llamado a nosotros a coordinar nuestros esfuerzos en defensa de la Constitución. Y estamos claros, si este presidente despide a Mueller o despide al Procurador General Sessions, nosotros abandonaremos donde estamos en cualquier lugar del mundo y regresaremos aquí para dar la lucha en defensa de nuestra Constitución y asegurar que este presidente no pueda destruir los caminos de la justicia. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now Representative David Cicilline.
Good morning. I want to thank Mr. Nadler, our ranking member, for bringing us together, and all of my colleagues for being here. This is a deadly serious moment. As Mr. Deutsch said, this is not a drill. The consequences of the president's actions are incredibly serious. And we are here urging our Republican colleagues to stand up in this moment, to stand up for rule of law, to stand up to protect our democratic institutions, and to prevent this country from moving to a constitutional crisis as a result of the president's actions. And it's in this moment that we have the greatest opportunity to stop President Trump from potentially firing Mr. Mueller or Attorney General Sessions. We had a great moment to do that in the omnibus, when we could have included legislation that would have prevented those actions, except for cause. And sadly, the message that sends to the president by the Republicans' leadership's failure to agree to that, I fear, will suggest to the president that he has some support for that action. So we're here today to make it clear that we will all do everything we can to protect the integrity of this investigation, to protect the ability of Mr. Mueller and his team to complete their work so the American people can find out the truth and get answers to the questions that are plaguing us. You have to wonder, if the president has nothing to hide, why is he constantly attempting to interfere with this investigation? Why is he so focused on undermining this investigation at every turn? And why is he so eager to attack the professional men and women who are doing the work, and yet unwilling to say anything unkind or critical of the Russian president. He's more comfortable attacking the fine professionals at the Department of Justice and the FBI. Why hasn't he released his tax returns? Still a tradition that existed for decades in this country. And you see time and time again more information about the corruption in the White House, about the conflicts of interest, about the financial relationships. And I think we all see this escalating rhetoric from the president as an attempt to lay the groundwork for the firing of Robert Mueller. He has his attorney say, oh, I think it's time the investigation was concluded. It's kind of unusual for the subject or target of investigation to dictate or suggest when it should end. But this, again, is, I think, because we see Mr. Mueller and his team doing their job, getting closer and closer to the Trump presidency and to the inner circle of the Trump administration. And so we're here today to say we will not allow this to happen, that we will stand up and fight to protect our democracy, to protect rule of law in this country, to protect our democratic institutions. There are brave men and women all over the world serving our country, serving in very dangerous places to protect the ideals of our democracy. We owe it to them to be sure we do our part, and so we hope our colleagues will join us in sending a very strong message to the president, making it clear that we will not tolerate his interference, his obstruction, his impediment, his undermining of this investigation in any way. And we're prepared, as Mr. Gutierrez said, to come back on a moment's notice to do everything that we can to protect the great values, the founding values of our extraordinary country. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Ted Lieu.
Thank you. Thank you, Ranking Member Nadler, for putting together this press conference to educate the American people. I'm going to make 3 points. First, Donald Trump's actions scream consciousness of guilt. I'm a former prosecutor. We're trained to recognize consciousness of guilt. We can introduce evidence of consciousness of guilt in trial. And what is that concept? It's what would a guilty person do that an innocent person would not? Some of those include not telling the truth, firing those who are investigating you, undermining those who are currently investigating you. Donald Trump's done all of that. Donald Trump believes that he is innocent. Robert Mueller is the only person that can clear his name. If the president really wants to have his name cleared, he needs to give Robert Mueller the opportunity to do so. The obstruction of justice statute is not very complicated. It doesn't say you actually have to obstruct justice. It just says you are guilty if you endeavor to influence a federal or congressional investigation with corrupt intent. Let's be clear here. If the president got Robert Mueller fired, that would be obstruction of justice. If you fired Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein to meddle with Robert Mueller, that would be obstruction of justice. If you fired Attorney General Sessions to meddle with Robert Mueller, that would be obstruction of justice. And by the way, here's a fun fact. Not only is that a felony, it's also an impeachable offense. The first article of impeachment that the House Judiciary Committee passed during Watergate was obstruction of justice. And then now let me conclude by talking about the special counsel leadership. The president has said that the special counsel's team is made up of hardened Democrats. That is just false. Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein testified under oath before our House Judiciary Committee and said there are 3 people leading this investigation. There's Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein, a Republican appointed by 2 Republican presidents. There's FBI Director Christopher Wray, a Republican who, by the way, gave over $37,000 exclusively to Republican candidates. And there's Robert Mueller, a Republican and a war hero. They are not hardened Democrats. They are solid Republicans putting country above party.
Thank you, Representative Jamie Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Nadler, for convening us at this moment of high danger for the American Republic. The threat to the Mueller investigation comes in 2 forms. One I think of as the guillotine, and the other is the straitjacket. With the guillotine, the president would be tempted just to fire Mueller or fire Attorney General Sessions and install someone who would fire Mueller. And that would obviously be a radical assault on the rule of law and a direct and compelling case of obstruction of justice. The other's a little more subtle. The straitjacket would be to fire Attorney General Sessions and to replace him with someone who would eliminate various lines of investigative inquiry and tighten the leash on the special counsel in order to interfere with the progress of the investigation. We have to be alert to both the guillotine strategy and the straitjacket strategy as we go into this recess period. The president keeps railing about how the Mueller investigation is a witch hunt. He has it wrong. He is the one conducting a witch hunt against the professional law enforcement prosecutors and investigators, most of whom are Republicans, as Mr. Liu says, who are working simply to do their jobs. And he is engaged in a fairly unprecedented presidential tirade against prosecutors, presumably because they are getting way too close to the truth for his own personal comfort. You will notice a bit of trepidation on the part of myself and my colleagues about going into the spring recess with an escalating series of threats and diatribes by the president against the special counsel. We know that this administration has engineered more turnover than any presidential administration in at least a century. So we have something real to fear here. The spring recess should be an opportunity for us to go and meet with our constituents and get other work done. And it should be an opportunity for everybody in the country to observe whatever holidays they're observing, Easter, Passover, or just to enjoy some rest and renewal. There are always a handful of people who go to Florida for spring break and start breaking things. And we're hoping that President Trump is not someone who's going to go to Florida, specifically Mar-a-Lago, and start breaking things in the Republic. And we want him to know that we understand that our eternal vigilance through this period is the price of our liberty and the rule of law.
Thank you. And now Representative Pramila Jayapal.
Thank you so much. I want to associate myself with the comments that have been made by all of my colleagues and thank our ranking member for holding this press conference. It is critical that we speak out. That's why we're doing it today. But I want to emphasize two specific points. First, for over a year, we on the Democratic side have been calling for our Judiciary Committee to actually hold hearings and investigate some of these issues. We've sent countless letters. We've asked for hearings, we've asked for witnesses to come and testify, and the answer has consistently been, let the investigation play out. The Judiciary Committee does not need to have jurisdiction over this issue because there is an ongoing investigation by Robert Mueller. That was the answer of the Republican majority to our pleas that we not cede the jurisdictional territory of the Judiciary Committee. Now what we see is the president, and in fact several Republican members of the committee who have consistently tried to undermine this investigation, consistently tried to undermine Robert Mueller, who was literally described as deeply nonpartisan, deeply apolitical, and as straight and narrow as they come. That was by Republicans. He is a Republican, a Bronze Star, and a Purple Heart veteran. So the damage that is being done right now to the investigation in numerous ways that have been described by my colleagues. Not only is Donald Trump trying to undermine Robert Mueller, but all of the credibility of the FBI and the other agencies that are involved in this investigation, that is of tremendously deep concern, and it is a strategy, it's a ploy. So that leads to my second point, which is, as much as this is a message to the president to not fire Robert Mueller, to not fire Jeff Sessions and trying to bring in another attorney general who would then fire Robert Mueller, this is also a message to the American people. This is a message to the American people that we must be vigilant and not just look at the things that immediately would occur to us as unconstitutional, as undemocratic, things like directly firing Robert Mueller, but also look at all of the actions that this administration is taking to undermine this investigation. The closer the investigation gets to the White House, the more chaotic, frenetic the responses become from this president. And it's easy in this environment where the most important thing, it seems, to the president is to be the star of his own reality TV show, to be numbed to what is happening. But we, the American people, we in Congress, have to be clear that it is our responsibility to hold up our democracy, to hold up our institutions of justice, and to ensure that ultimately we preserve our Constitution. Thank you.
Finally, Representative Val Demings.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you to our ranking member for calling this press conference. I've been in Congress for 1 year, but I have 27 years of law enforcement experience. And I stand here on that experience today as I speak to you. A narcissist who is guilty of wrongdoing will do anything to save themselves, especially when their way of life has been a pattern of reckless and total disregard for the rule of law. He would destroy his family, his so-called friends, his loyal employees. As my colleague Hank Johnson said, the president is a desperate man. And let me remind you that desperate people will do desperate things. I've investigated enough people, enough narcissists, and enough cases to know that for a fact. While we do not know the entire truth yet, the president knows. He knows the whole truth. And he also knows that Mr. Mueller will not stop until he gets to the bottom of it all. Not for himself, not for any political agenda, but for the American people. I got to tell you, I'm pretty disappointed in my Republican colleagues. Where are they? Why aren't they a part of this press conference to protect the investigation? But no action from the Republican leadership, absent, neglect of duty, total disregard for the responsibilities that they have. Where's the leadership on the Republican side? Every person who says that they love this country should want to protect this investigation for the American people. But in the absence of leadership, we appeal today to the American people to help us protect the special counsel and allow him to finish his work. The truth will come out. If the president tries to fire the special counsel, or if he does it, the truth is not going away. The truth will come out, but the question is how much damage will have occurred if we don't get to the truth now. If a local police department or a local police detective was conducting an investigation and suddenly that investigation was disrupted for political reasons, we would never tolerate that. So I appeal to the American people to let the special counsel finish his work and get to the bottom, get to the truth. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Mr. Nadler, based on all the strong statements that you've all made about what's at risk if Mr. Mueller is undercut in some way, and based on all the evidence you've already seen and the information that's come forward as a result of his investigation, are you willing to say that if Democrats take back the House next year, that a Judiciary Committee that you chair would not immediately begin impeachment proceedings against the president?
No, I'm not going to say that. Let me just say that with the House Intelligence Committee today moving to close this investigation, Republicans have so far refused to provide any accountability for the actions of the administration. And so far, Chairman Goodlatte has used the Mueller investigation as an excuse for us not to have hearings or conduct oversight in the House Judiciary Committee, as was said a moment ago. Should a red line be crossed, and firing the special counsel or throttling his investigation would be an absolute red line, then there would be a total sea change in the political landscape of the country, and at that point, all options would be on the table. All options would be on the table. I believe that if the president puts us in a constitutional crisis, that there are enough Republicans who care about the rule of law and are concerned by the president's action that they would be moved to act too. But if this happens, if the president puts us in a constitutional crisis by crossing a red line, by firing the special prosecutor or really constraining the investigation, all options would be on the table, but we're not going to say now what we would do then, because all kinds of things change. Not just change, but we're not there yet.
If this is such a crisis moment, why not insist that this omnibus withhold your votes from it, for it, unless there was a protection for Mueller in it? If this is really a constitutional crisis.
Well, this is a potential constitutional crisis. I'm not going to comment on the omnibus. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I plan to read it before we vote. That's not in total seriousness, obviously. But the omnibus is I think everyone has to answer that question for himself. I'm not going to comment on that. It's a different question. All I will say is that if that happened, all options would be on the table.
On the omnibus, would you answer a question about what you think about the bill?
No, not at this present. It's a different subject entirely. And we may have different opinions standing here. I don't know. Sure.
I agree with my chairman on the idea of all options are on the table. I think we are, as a group of lawyers and non-lawyers and holders of the Constitution, are laying down a marker for the American people. I think part of it is an education journey for the American people. What is a constitutional crisis? And we've mentioned the obstruction of justice. We've mentioned from a former chief, I think something that the American people can understand, that their local law enforcement was investigating a dastardly crime and someone came in and shut it down. They would understand that. I want to join my colleague, Steve Cohen. He has a review of the firing of the special counsel. We have a bill 3684 that stops the firing in its tracks by going into court, having to have a court order to determine whether or not the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General could fire the special counsel for cause. So why we are here is it is important for there to be the story told as to why we have to join together or drop what we're doing and fly up. We are action-oriented. And the difficulty that we're dealing with is that we have two leaders, one in the Senate and one in the House, that seems to be taking the word of someone who has precipitously fired Sally Yates, Director Comey, and has criticized his own Republican appointees as participating in a witch hunt. That's a constitutional crisis. And there are many ways that this committee could look at this issue, and we'd hope it would be bipartisan. I'm sad to say that rumoring between now and tomorrow are some subpoenas to be issued unilaterally by one party of this committee, and it's not us, to begin a action on issues that have occurred on individuals who are not in government, per se. And so they want to shut down the Intelligence Committee's investigation. They want to begin a unilateral investigation on issues that deal with individuals no longer in the federal government, but they will not look at the actions of the President of the United States, who has a history of firing, demeaning, calling a witch hunt, and really intimidating both the Deputy Attorney General and, of course, General Sessions. My point with what Congressman Luis Gutierrez said, General Sessions is opposed to real, fair criminal justice reform. Some of us might say that's a reason for him to go. But we're standing here saying that his firing, similar to the Saturday Night Massacre, would warrant immediate action, not by Democrats, but by Democrats and Republicans. And I think we could hold a little book called The Constitution, which articulates the various options that we would have, but it would certainly have to be an option that Republicans and Democrats would stand together to stand back up their government and to put the infrastructure back in place and to call it not a red line or blue line, but a red, white, and blue, which is what this nation has always succeeded on, is when we work together to make sure our Constitution works. The president is not familiar with the Constitution, and therefore I think it's important for those of us on this committee to make him familiar with it.
Are there any other questions? What?
How confident are you if your Republican colleagues will step in and intervene if President Trump tries to fire Robert Mueller?
Well, as I said, if that red line were crossed, there would be a total sea change in the political landscape of this country. And I think we are confident that some Republicans, hopefully a lot of them, would step up. That question is really a question of how confident are we that Republicans are patriots and support the Constitution and this country. I think we're pretty hopeful and somewhat confident. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
More retired, we have more courage. Retired ones, and the ones that don't stand up.
Jerry, good work. It was a great idea. Yeah.